called MRV Engenharia. Is one of the biggest construction company and engineering companies in Brazil, from Família Menin, from Minas Gerais. And basically, what they did is that they always showed this kind of like a beginner's mindset to always look at their customers' problems and try to solve them, although it was not part of their expertise. Because what they noticed around 10 years ago is that one of the biggest problems of their customers was to get a mortgage. Like, it would take months and a lot of paperwork through traditional banks, and they would pay crazy interest rates. And so that was a problem for them because they would sell less apartments because of this bottleneck. And so they said, okay, we're a construction company, we're not a banking company, but although we'll try to learn and get into that market and see what happens. And so they bought a small bank called Intermedium, and they digitized the bank. They started to, like, fasten operations, and this was proven to be successful, but actually much more successful than expected, so that it grew, up to the point that it became Banco Inter, that some of you might know, maybe are even customer of, that is one of the biggest fintechs in Brazil. And when we think about it, it was born within a construction company. And you'd be like, Andrea, like, what a lack of focus. Like, they're a construction company, why should they focus on launching a digital bank? And the truth is that my answer is the opposite. That's a lot of focus. It's no focus, and it's a lack of focus on their product, their market, their competition, but it's a lot of focus on the most important thing that there is, which is the customer. And when we look at companies that are extremely customer-centric, like Amazon has this great story that basically there is always an empty chair in their meeting rooms that Jeff Bezos, at first, the founder of Amazon, would always take and put next to the table, meeting table, whenever everyone was seated, just to remind about one thing, that was the customer's chair, that it was the most important person in the room, although not being there. And oftentimes we make decisions without that customer chair. We start from our product, we start from our processes, we start from our own objectives, and we forget about the customer, especially in an upstream business. And so the truth is that we have to bring back the chair into the room, metaphorically. And why so? Because consumers and customers are much more powerful now in a digital world than in the past. And as leaders, we have to acknowledge that. And therefore, we have to change our focus. Because let's look at the 4 big levers that empower our customers with respect to the past. First of all, customers have more access to information in a digital world. They can read reviews, they can compare, they can inform themselves about these new technologies that you're suggesting them. And we are not at Shell, the only source of information anymore. This, of course, empowers any customer, especially end consumers, that are the final recipients of our upstream operations. Second thing, there's more competition, but not only more competition in our upstream, drilling and producing market, but also there's more competition in channels, in the way that our consumer can engage with us. There's more competition in the attention and focus of our consumers. Third one, there's lower switching costs. Technology and digital has lowered the switching cost of a customer that maybe was like, in a very long-standing relationship with Shell because we were the only options, or just because they were not aware of alternatives, or it just was too costly to switch us. Now, it's much easier. You can do digital contracts. You can just, find other suppliers and so on. And so this has put a lot of power to the customer. And is that customers are content creators. And so, especially end consumers, they talk about business. And so, therefore, what happens is that they talk about their impact that these businesses have on their expectations. Because I want you to imagine yourself living in a world that you can see Netflix addicts will recognize this coming from the Black Mirror series, which basically is a world where at every interaction that you have, let's say that you interact with a customer, you liked, the way that they behaved, you give 5 stars, they liked your pitch, you give also 5 stars back, and everything that you do with your customers, with your colleagues, with your leaders is measured. And this rating kind of like, is like a hologram that sticks on the top of our heads and is visible and transparent to anyone else. Think about living in such a world. First of all, what would happen in our relation with our customers? We definitely focus on providing the best experience ever. Has anyone rented their apartment before Airbnb? You would leave your apartment kind of like, tidy, but not so clean, because, of course, who would know, right? It was the story about taxis and Ubers eventually. Now you rent it out on Airbnb, you double check the house and you clean every single, part of it. Why? Because we have this expectation of being, in a transparent world, of providing the best consumer experiences. The second thing that I want you to think about is, are we living in a world that is very far away from this one? Of course not. We all have a rating. It's just opening our Uber app or our, again, TripAdvisor and stuff like that. All establishments and even people, we all have ratings. And the third thing that I want you to think about is, what happens in such a world where through digital interactions between companies and customers, we actually collect more data. And when we look at the volume of data generated since the beginning of humanity, this has been growing exponentially, where more than 90% of data generated since the beginning of times was generated over the last 10 years. And this does not stop to grow. And one of the great things that we, jump to conclusions and we think, okay, this is amazing. The more data that we'll have from Sabine's teams or from our operations, from blockchain or from digital twins, the better decisions we will make. And this conclusion is most, of the times wrong. Why? Because it really depends on what we do with this data and how able are we to actually make better decisions based on them.